Welcome, everyone. Hi, career thought leaders. We're good to see you here today. And we have Susan Chritton here with us today, who is the teacher, instructor for our personal branding program. She's also the author of Personal Branding for Dummies, and she will be speaking at our upcoming symposium in Lisbon. And Susan, it's so good to see you.
Good to see you too. Almost
Yeah,
Valentine's. I've got my Valentine's kind of colors on for you here.
I saw that. This is funny. I was wearing a sweater earlier that was the right color, but it was all wrinkly. I was like, well, that's just not going to do on live video. So um, when we think about brain, I don't know if you've been seeing this conversation a lot, but I've been seeing a lot about ageism in the in LinkedIn and other places. And so you and I got to talking about how do we help our clients avoid, combat, I'm not quite sure what the right word is, right? But
Yeah.
how do we help them deal with the fact that there's ageism out there? And of course, because we love personal branding, this is one of the things that we know helps people. So when you think about your clients that you've worked with who are older, I'll put that in air quotes, right? Because we know that bias starts at like age 40. How do you see them? How do you see personal branding come in to help them?
Well, there are so many things that I could go with. One of the things that I recently read, maybe we can start with this, was they were talking about all the cosmetics like Botox and different things, and in the 60s, which is luckily before I was a little girl, but before my time. Basically, it was don't trust anybody over 30. And now, with all the Botox, it's that don't look like anybody over 30. And I thought that was a really interesting comment that I had seen with someone, because it's an interesting thing, because we have so many generations in the workplace. The baby boomer generation actually are a lot of people who still want to work. And I think there's so many ways we could take this conversation. One of them, I think, is that when I see this with my clients, one of the things I try and talk to them about is I think that we were all, at least in my age group, raised of, you progress, get or more and more money, and then you retire. And so I think the very first thing I really try and do with somebody is say, let's look at what you really need. What is it that is happening for you? And can your ego take that maybe you don't earn as much money? Maybe you work at a different capacity. And so I think the very first thing is looking at expectations. And it's not a matter of saying you're not worth this or you're not capable. It's that other place of really taking a hard look at, and here's where we go with the personal branding, take a really hard look at who you are, what you want, what you need now. I mean, lately, one of my favorite things to say is, let's look at you in present time.
Well, and that's so important, that internal piece, not just of who you are, but also what do you value, not just about yourself, but about work. In the post that I kind of posted to promote this, one of the things that I've seen is that people don't realize that they are ageist because they're older. So we think, oh, if you're 50, you aren't age biased, but we are. And we actually even kind of turn that bias onto ourselves, right? That I'm older, I should be slowing down, or that idea of retirement that I don't think it's existed for a while, but it's out there. I don't think people realize that they're bringing ageism into the conversation because none of us are immune to that bias, even those of us who might be of the age who get biased against.
Right. And it's something I've said for all ages of my clients over the years, because what I often find is people who are heavy into, say, a big corporate job, or maybe they run a firm or whatever it might be, is they're kind of an on-off switch kind of person. So they're either fully on or their light switch is off, right? And so I'm really a big dimmer switch person, right? Like, how do you start to look at what's the dimmer switch? And one thing I will say with, at least as I notice, especially not just clients, but I'm in an age group where a lot of my friends are starting to retire, is that the ones that do the work, which is very few of them, seem to do really well in that transition into a different way. Maybe it's part-time work, maybe it's really taking a different view of the community or whatever it might be. But it's really a dimmer switch approach versus a on off, oh, I'll go play golf. I mean, the joke of that is, right, after 6 months, then what?
Right. Well, and two, there's this idea that I'm going to brand myself based on my years of experience. And I find this maybe more in the 40 to 55 range than
Yeah.
older than that. But you get this group of people that really wants to hang their hat on their years of experience. And then they wonder why they're getting age bias. And it's not just because of the years, but it's also because what you're putting out there as your brand is years of experience instead of kind of the value of what you deliver. So how have you seen that go with clients?
Yeah. And, and that goes back to, who are you now? Really taking a look at not, sometimes, so to answer your question too, sometimes I'll see people say, oh, I was a vice president here, I should be a vice president again. One of the questions I'll ask is, do you really want to be that now? Do you want that responsibility now? What do you want with that? And so they're in a way selling who they've been. And it goes with your point of how many years. They're really selling, this is the level I was at. And they think if they did something else, they would diminish who they are, instead of really looking internally and saying, I am happy with who I am as a human being. Here's how I want to work now. And, and it can be, so I'm looking at how might somebody do something differently, but so now I feel like I'm old, is that I have seen in my entire career, people saying the statement of, oh, in this economy. And I heard somebody, I did a webinar for an outplacement firm the other day, and somebody said that, and I go, economy's good. Like, things are happening. And he says, well, I don't know where you live. And I said, no, it's in the news. Like, take a look. And I said, it's the excuse people use for things not going the way they think it should go. Let's blame the outside piece of it. So back to I know I'm jumping all around here and probably making you crazy, but back to the personal branding piece. I think anytime you go through a big change, and ageism is also a place of coming into a different reality of, I'm in a different space in my life. You always need to go back to the core of who you are. And that's what personal branding's really all based on, right? What do you care about? What do you feel is your purpose? What are your values now, right? So what are your values now? You and I are in a different place. You have little school-age children. I don't, right? So our values are going to be different. When I was where you were, I had probably more similar values. But you look at, what are my interests now? What do I want to keep learning? And I think that's a huge piece to combat ageism, is that if you're always learning, your brain is never old.
Well, and two, it gives you a few things that you've said. One, when you know who you are, you have that confidence. So when you show up very secure, and this is who I am, and this is the value that I bring, and you're not trying to shove yourself back into a box that you've grown out of, perhaps, then you just bring that different confidence. And then also looking at that learning piece with that, it shows your curiosity. You don't think you know it all. You're not coming in trying to be, be a certain way, but that you're going to grow into whatever the organization is looking for. So that's kind of the one side of it. The other side of it is the audience. And this is the other piece that I feel like, all job seekers miss. But when you've got a specific bias getting in your way, it's even more important to not miss that audience piece, right?
Right. So, and you're right. I mean, that's something that people are so focused on. How will I present myself, and how will I be this, and how will I be that? It's like, hold on a minute. Who are you speaking to? Who is your target audience? Are you writing in a way that's going to appeal to them? Are you showing up in a way that appeals to them? And this is where I think there are certain industries that have even more age bias, often technology. Certainly like the gaming industry. I once had a woman who was probably late 50s, maybe 60, who dyed her hair, had a facelift and everything so she could keep a job in the gaming industry. And it was kind of sad, actually. I'm like, do you even want to stay there?
Yeah.
So I think
The industry.
knowing your target audience, and if you're always going to be fighting that, maybe you don't care. Maybe you like kind of the fight of it and proving them wrong. But other people might just say, I don't want to keep working in a place where I'm always having to prove that I, am with it and current and all those things. So I think it's really important to look at your target audience. Who is it that they are? What do they need to hear? How does that relate to you and what you have to offer? All of those things. Yeah.
Right. And then you're making that connection of what do they need and how do you match up, instead of, as you said earlier, just being focused on who you are, and maybe on who you were even more than who you are.
And I also think one of the things I do see with people as they get later into their career, they've had, and I'm doing a talk at the conference on wisdom. So I've been thinking a lot about wisdom and reading a lot about different books. I have a stack of books I've been going through and pulling things about that. Is part of wisdom is really pulling in not just your knowledge, which I think I'll just speak for myself. I worked hard on for a lot of my career to know enough to be proficient and excellent at my career. What wisdom is when you've had enough relationships and enough life experience that you can see patterns, that you can start to see patterns of where things are going to start to go wrong. And you have I think the wisdom comes in that more holistic view of it. And I think that's something you can really sell to a potential employer as well, is that ability to pick up on when things are going wrong more quickly, to see what's going right and duplicate that, to bring that sense of not just, I've been here, done that. That's not it. I mean, it's how much have you learned from those things that have happened? And what I do see with clients is they're saying, I never want to do that again, or this is something I've learned in my career where I am at my best. And so I think the wisdom comes in as all those years of experience coupled with the knowledge and the ability to know yourself better, to say, this is a good spot, this isn't a good spot.
So we've got that wisdom that we put out, the wisdom we bring to our job, and then also helping our clients turn that wisdom around and use wisdom for their own branding, their own conversations that they're having.
Exactly. And I think that's a pretty critical piece, is that as I'm working with a client, helping them start to understand who they are, what wisdom do they have to share, what are things that they know about themselves that they do want to do again, don't want to do again, where they get really tired, or where they love, where they're super energized, right?
Yeah. And Angela said, excellent point on wisdom. Thanks, Angela. Well, and two, since you brought up that energy piece, this is where I feel like branding is energizing. I don't know. I see that with you, that when you really know who you are and where you're going and you have that confidence, it also brings up your energy level. And that's, of course, one of the things people with ageism are somewhat fighting against, the stereotype that they don't have energy. So I just had that epiphany too, that those two go together.
And I think, it goes to that place. So I'm a big fan of Chip Connolly's and his Modern Elder Academy, as you know. And one of the things his favorite sayings is, a modern elder is as curious as they are wise. And so I think from an energy standpoint, and this is certainly me, is that I'm always curious, drives everybody crazy around me, because I probably started as a really small child of, I'm always interested in, well, why does that happen? Well, what about that? Well, that keeps me energized, right? Like that's an interesting piece for that. And you can be 30 years old and an old person who never asks the question why, right?
Right.
So some of that
that doesn't, bring the energy.
Right. Brings the energy to that. And and it's interesting because there's a lot of things that I think that in sort of that kind of tips to address ageism, one of the things I'll often hear, and I'd love a dialogue on this one, is, oh, you're over, like not necessarily me, but I hear this from my clients, oh, you're overqualified. And I think one way to combat that is to say, just think what a bargain you'll be getting then.
Right? Well, and I think overqualified comes from not exploring those branding pieces we were talking about before. When you are trying to take a step back, but you really haven't looked at who's the audience. What are they really looking for? How do you align to what they're looking for? Or is that the right place for you? And I know some people think that it'll be easier to find a job if they take a step down. And that's just not reality, right? Your best job search is at the level you've been at the role you've been at. And even a step down is going to elongate your job search because it isn't that, match. And so we've got to do the work to communicate the match. And most people don't do that. They think, oh, I've got all these great things. Why wouldn't you hire me? It's like, because they're looking to hire X and you're sharing X, 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 X. It's like, it just doesn't match up.
Right. And we all, I think one of the things too, as somebody ages, like I look at all the different things I've done in my career, and there's a bunch of them that's like, I don't want to do those again. So I'm not even going to talk about them. Right. So I was very good with budgets. I could manage them quite well. I could manage my whole project, budgets on everything. And I could still do that. I just don't love it. So I'm not even going to talk about it.
Yeah. Yes. And I think that too, there's that ego piece you talked about earlier. What do I want to do versus what does my ego kind of need? And how can I untether those two a little bit and really set that down to do what I want to do, not what my ego needs me to do.
Well, and I'll tell you another place that I am seeing with my clients is sometimes, like nobody necessarily reaches out to a career coach when everything's going great, right? So almost always there's something that isn't working well. And I have a client who is just unhappy with the way they are being treated by their boss. And not that isn't something that hits every generation, but I sometimes think as people get older, maybe have had more experience with that, their soul can't take it anymore. And I think that actually happens at all ages, really, but there's this place. What gets harder is the golden handcuffs piece of it. They make so much money and they've got a big title. Now what?
Yeah. Yeah. And that you're right. That happens at all ages. But when you get to, especially maybe closer to that retirement age where you're thinking about, oh, I need to have this money, I need to get vested, whatever it might be, that you really struggle more with that. And or just kind of recognize faster that you don't have to put up with it.
Yeah. And there are things that kind of back to the personal branding. I think when somebody has done their work, first of all, they know more quickly, is this even something I should apply for, or I should even have a conversation with someone about? And I always encourage, if it's within the realm, go talk to them. You can always say no. One conversation isn't going to take up that much of your time. But what I do see, and this is where having me as a coach, right? I remember this one man, we did all this work on his brand, and he goes, okay, I had this interview. And I go, what are you talking about? That is everything you've told me you didn't want to do again. He stops and he goes, oh my gosh, you're right. You're right. He said, I was so caught up in that they wanted me that I just forgot about everything we've worked on. And I said, well, that's why you have me to tell you not to do this. And he ended up with just an awesome situation down the road where he was very true to himself and sent me a case of wine as a thank you. That was always nice too.
Yeah.
But yeah.
Well, I think that comes to the difference between knowledge and wisdom about oneself, right? Knowing yourself versus having the wisdom to really discern, is it a good fit for me or not?
Yeah. I mean, often when I'll do assessments with people, many times they've done, say, the Gallup Strengths Finder in their workplace, and that was knowledge, right? Right. Somebody told them about it, but nothing sunk in. And when I work with them, we're digging deep. Tell me where you use this. How do you love that about yourself? They really own it, and it becomes, in a way, their wisdom that they carry to say, I can't compromise on who that is, that piece of me.
Mm. Yeah. And then
And I,
once we
and I know
start
we
to do that,
I know we've probably strayed a little away from the ageism piece. Um, I think it is real. I think there are industries it's more real with. What I do find hopeful is if someone can learn to know about themselves, know what they have to offer, know where their gaps are. That's another piece. What do
mm,
they need to fill those gaps, maybe while they're in transition? Is that there's actually a lot of work out there, and there's so many qualities that someone could talk about that they bring to the table that are things that are worries for the employer. Like, for one, I don't have sick children. I'm not going to take sick leave with because of my kids. Or, there are things that, there that could be a good balance that many times too, the people interviewing are just out of college. They've got a recruiter job at a company. They're very young, and they don't even, to them, somebody like me looks ancient.
that difference. Well, and I was
Mhm.
going to say too, I've heard people say that they're doing more consulting work or finding that easier to find
Mhm.
when they're in this age group. And that's part of the wisdom too, of the flexibility of what could I do to leverage my strengths and when am I being taken advantage of? Because I think those
Mhm.
could go either way.
Right, right. So, so I think that there is one of the things too. I remember so I have worked in 3 different outplacement firms. I had this one man in there, and he had dyed his hair, and it was this awful orange color. And I said, well, tell me what your strategy is. I'm trying to be really nice, right? And he says, well, I don't want them to think I'm old. And I said, well, don't act old. I mean, I know that's a flippant, simple answer, but there is something to that, right? It goes back to your statement of energy and coming where you're energetic and you care and you're interested. That's something that's, hard to find. And if people are just worried about their physical age, yes, there's things you can do to look nice. Yes, there's things that you can do to fit into a certain point. But I do think you need to have that energy of interest and curiosity and not acting old. And there are times too where I did some work for a startup company here in the Bay Area, and even the CEO was, I think he was 34. Like, it was a very young company. And I come in, I look like their mother, right? And I just addressed it and I said, I'm I'm quite a bit different in age than most of you. Is that going to bother you? And I said, think of it this way. I add diversity to your workplace. Oh, we're all about diversity. This is great.
Well, that's how I got my first leadership coaching gig, was that all of the coaches on their team were over 50. And so they
Mhm.
brought me in as the young one because, diversity and age goes both ways. But I
Right,
love this.
right.
So Lorraine saying that she liked your quote from Chip Conley, the curiosity piece, and
Mhm,
then the looking younger.
mhm,
Um, and I think that's a personal piece of your brand.
mhm,
I've worked with people with all types of bias and talked about how you
mhm,
can change how you look, like
mhm,
your appearance. You can change how you look in terms of like networking more or doing things
mhm.
differently in your job search, or you can change where you look, which you kind of talked about earlier. So avoiding those industries where we know that there's more age bias, and maybe looking in the industries where there's less, and that those are all options for people to make that decision of what's going to be best for them.
And I mean, this is my personality, so it's not going to work for everybody, but I'm a big one to kind of lay the cards on the table and say, are you concerned about my age? And then right? It's an open discussion. Now, usually they go, but, I think that is, I don't think that's necessarily bad to, if you're picking it up, to sometimes maybe just say it, and then it becomes a discussion.
Right, and to be ready for that, and to be ready for the things they might be concerned about. I mean, we've talked a little bit about energy, we could talk about technology use. I find sometimes people hesitate to go down the stereotypes road, but if you're not real, then you're gonna get caught off guard.
Mhm, mhm. Yeah. I mean, I love that movie, The Intern, right, with Robert De Niro. Do you remember
Yeah.
that? I'm not sure if you saw that, right? But he just brought such a sense of calm to the office and stability, and it was kind of what they needed to actually take off in the business. And so I think there is that place, again, back to your circling back to the personal branding piece, is if you know yourself and know what those qualities that you can bring to something that might be different. I mean, the thing is, I always think of interviewing like dating. You don't just want them to like you want to like them too, right? It
Right.
has to be a good fit both ways.
Yeah. Brenda says that's one of her favorite movies.
Yeah, mine too.
Well, and I was thinking about this because I have to come up with a movie quote for a radio show. And I don't know if you've ever watched the show *Halt and Catch Fire*, but *Halt and Catch Fire* was a show, I think it was on one of the more obscure channels like A&E or something like that. But it was all about the startups in the first computer era. So kind of the invention of the IBM computer and those types of things. And it's a younger couple trying to develop the technology, and they hire this older sales guy, and he's that presence in the movie, right? He's that presence in their business, where he brings the wisdom that they don't have. He can develop the relationships that they can't. And that's what you're thinking about when your brand, and your brand as a older person may not be that steady Eddie. You might be the person that has all of these experiences that you can bring, or the curiosity and energy. So I don't think we need to pigeonhole a brand because of a certain
No,
age. But you do want
matter
to
of
figure out
fact,
what that is.
I think, a place that I don't see people go using enough as a selling point is that the baby boomer market, or the people say over 60, huge market for selling things, and
Right.
so here we've got, all the marketing often geared for really young people. It's like, hello, who's the ones with the money? Right. And so I think part of a wisdom piece would be if that was the area of work that you did, is to really look at that target audience that you were either selling to, marketing to, working with. And I think that could be something that's a huge selling point, because you might understand who the customer audience is better.
Right. Yeah. So pulling those experiences and connecting them to the value,
Mhm.
back to our point earlier about just talking about years of experience, right? Instead of this kind of overarching years of experience, it's like, what in there? What
Mhm.
wisdom, what experiences in there can you connect to what the company you're targeting is really looking for right now?
Mhm. Yeah. And I think it's as with any age that you're in job search. Early on, no one knew what we did in this field. And so I was constantly trying to find the gap, find how I could be valuable to whoever it is I was talking to. And I also had little kids at the time when I was early on in this career, and I didn't want to work full time. And nobody worked part time back then. Like, that was nobody was very flexible at that time. And I came in with, you don't need to pay my medical insurance. I want to work, so many days. And there was this one place that I worked, and I knew they couldn't pay me very much, but it was in Berkeley, and Berkeley parking is terrible. And I said, I see you have a parking lot. And they go, yes. And I said, I'll tell you what, I will take your lower pay if you guarantee me a parking spot. That was part of my
Right.
negotiation.
Negotiation. Yeah. Then Nancy was just sharing that the job search groups, and you can feel the positive energy from the ones that get jobs. Yeah, I always found that it's just so hard when I went to those job search groups because it was so obvious, but it's one of those things, it's really hard to help people understand that your qualifications may not be what's holding you back. It's this kind of intangible energy piece.
Yeah. And they were often, you just walk in and the energy was like, right?
Yeah.
It just, everybody's so kind of depressed and down and nothing's happening. And they want to blame the economy or blame my age. And it's like, get out there and get interested, drum things up if you want. Yeah.
Yeah. So tell us, Susan, people are coming to the symposium. What are a few takeaways that they'll get from your presentation, our coaches and resume writers?
Yeah, so I'm going to dig deeper into this idea of wisdom. And I have put together kind of a lot of my sort of what that means, how to look at it, what are some components of it. But then what I really want to do, and this is the part I'm still working on, is I'm coming up with some exercises where they get to look at what wisdom do they have, how might they share it, and how might they use it in their own plans for the future. And so I'm weaving that in right now. Right now I've put together all my questions, and I've put together just how to take a really hard look at what is wisdom? What does that mean for you? How is it unique to each of you? And, as in almost everything I do, you do it first and then use it on your clients, right? So I'll give you good questions to ask, exercises to do, some things to take away that you can, I hope, duplicate with your clients as well.
Excellent. Yay. Well, I'm so excited to see you. And I know some of you that are joining us today. I saw Valerie joining us in Lisbon. So I can't wait to see you all in Lisbon. And if you haven't registered yet, there's still time to register. Our price increase won't happen until the middle of March. So you still have some time that you can plan your excursion and join us in Lisbon. Susan, thanks so much for talking.
Before we go on that, is that we also have some really fun trips, like little day trips planned, and some things to go see Lisbon. I'm in charge of the Saturday after the conference trip to Sinter Castle. So I hope you all can come.
Yeah. I'm looking forward to it. We already have one bus filled, and I'm sure we'll have 2 buses filled by the time we get there. So thank you, everyone. And thanks, Susan. I look forward to seeing you in Lisbon.
Very good. Thank you.